All right, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us this evening. We have Tony from Wakefield Biochar with us, and Tony, thank you for taking time with us this evening to talk about biochar.
Oh, right. I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, any chance I get to talk about biochar, I love it. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You're more than welcome. So let's kind of talk about your involvement with biochar and how you got started, and then we'll go into what biochar is.
Sure. So it's Wakefield Biochar is a family business. I actually got started in it with no real experience with the soil or gardening. I actually was doing I had a business selling soccer shoes and soccer balls online. I was a retail guy in marketing. And what happened was my father was a chemical engineering professor at the University of Missouri. And I have a twin brother. He actually got a PhD using biochar back in the late 90s. And he kind of put that on a shelf for a while, but he used it a long time ago.
Right.
My dad was using it in his research, kind of. He was sort of playing around with it. And sometime around 2013, 2014, our dad was going to retire from being a professor. He'd been a professor forever.
Right.
I said, Dad, let's start a blog about biochar. You like it? It seems interesting. Let's just have a blog, and you keep talking about biochar. And so that's what I did. My job was to create a little blog for him to do stuff. And we called it Wakefield Biochar. We thought it sounded like a good farmer's name. You know,
right.
my last name is Marrero. I don't think I even say it correctly. And so Marrero Biochar didn't work. I thought, let's call it Wakefield Biochar. And so that's what happened. It was a family thing that my brother and I, and with our dad, we did that to start. And I put a couple bags of biochar online, and people got interested in it. I started to learn a lot more. I had a little bit of experience because of that. I just kind of tested it in my front yard or in my garden, and I saw some really positive things happen. And so you kind of have that aha moment.
Right.
That happens a lot. I think with certain things where you didn't know about it, and you try it, and you're like, oh, that's something that I wish I had known about. And that happened around 2013, 2014. And so what we did is we just kind of let Wakefield Biochar grow organically, and that's it.
Right.
It just seemed like the right thing to do. And every year, more people were interested. More people were wanting to buy a bag of biochar. And so we learned more and more about it. We were actually learning about it as much as we were promoting it. And that's really what happened. So, long story short is in around 2020, right, with COVID, a lot of people found their backyard again. A lot of people wanted to take care of their grass or to start a garden.
Right.
And they were online, and I just happened to be pretty comfortable with online marketing, and we got ourselves in front of a lot of people and shared biochar, the story, and people were able to buy it. And that's really where Wakefield kind of took off. It was in 2020. And since then, it's just been awesome to see biochar and its interest and awareness and demand grow. Literally, like it seems like every week something happens.
Yeah. It does continue to grow. Last year I had heard about biochar, and there was a guy that he's usually in the chat pretty good, Eric Hale, and he kept on saying, "Oh, you need to use biochar. You need to use biochar." And this was in 2021, and I was like, "What is biochar?" And I start looking into it and stuff, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, like biochar," And then I talked to a guy who had the same size pumpkin as me at a weigh off. I mean, I think he was like 5 inches overall bigger than me. Okay. Which should not have equated to the amount that he was heavier than I, right? I mean, it should have been, 5 inches at that size might have been like 100 pounds or something like that, somewhere around there. So he could have been, technically he could have been heavy or light. He could have been 100 pounds over or 100 pounds light, but 5 inches of that measurement is really not that much more. And mine weighed 2% heavy, and it was 947 pounds, but his was like 13 or something percent heavy. Okay. And I'm like, or it might have been more than that. I can't remember now, but it was significantly higher than mine. And so I weighed 947 at 2% higher, and he was like 1,200 pounds. So
Oh,
I mean, he was significantly bigger,
yeah.
but only 5 inches difference in the circumference, the side to side, and the back to front, which would be stem to blossom in measurement. And so I'm sitting there scratching my head like what that don't even make sense. How you can be that
Yeah.
much heavier than me. So I go up to him and I said, Danny, what is the deal with this? And he said, I use biochar. I
Hmm.
said, okay,
Okay.
no more playing around.
Yeah.
I'm finding biochar and I'm going to talk to somebody about this because I've got to get my hands on it and use it, right? And so I start researching. I found you guys, and I was like, you know what? This seems to be the trick right here. So
Yeah.
I mean, the proof is in the pudding this year. I mean, it is. For me, I'm sitting there going, this is great, right? But let's hear your side of it and why it's useful, why it's beneficial to the gardener and to the giant grower. Because
Yeah.
it isn't just for giant growing; it's for gardening of all sorts.
It is, and I really do love to hear that kind of story because that's really where you can see that's where you had your aha moment. You're like, oh,
Right,
that's something I need to figure out. And I think what really is going on is that so biochar, I mean, it's in the simplest form, is just it's carbon made in a way from a waste wood is what we use
right,
that is great for your soil for growing because of its porosity, and there's a charge to it, a chemistry that allows for water and nutrients, nitrogen. It does get absorbed in there, and that's one of the things people talk about is that but it's taking that stuff away from the soil. It's not. It's leaving it. It's keeping it in the soil, and
right,
then
right,
allowing like these lighter molecules, the nutrients, these things that you want, tend to be allowed back out, as well as, and this is I think the most important thing, is the microbes, microbial activity, the good bacteria. They actually find a home in the char,
right,
and they start to set up shop. I mean, it's just time to go to work, right?
right,
And but they just thrive, and you create a community of microbes that you would not normally have because that biochar is there to give them a structure, gives them a home,
right,
and it's so porous. Like good biochar, a tablespoon of it has enough surface area that if you flatten it out, it covers the soccer field,
yep,
right? So
right,
that's what we're talking about at the microscopic level. It is facilitating that really a healthy ecosystem in the
yep,
soil is what's going on. And so then you go, well, how does that affect the plant? It's the root mass.
yep,
The root mass is so much healthier. You will see, and we've seen it time and time again, not only a denser or healthier root mass, but sometimes it's a longer root, where it's going to tap down in. You're going
yep,
to get a much more effective or efficient transfer of nutrients into that plant. And at times when there might be a drought, at times when there might be issues with the soil, because of the char and the ability to impact the health of the root, that plant is going to survive. It's going to thrive. And
right,
so I think, without knowing honestly, not knowing all the science of what happened with the pumpkin, right? My
right,
sense is it was more nutrient dense. It had what it needed, and it had it more effectively, and it allowed it to get the mass that it did. And,
right.
and I feel like that's the beauty of biochar. It's really a very natural
It is. Well,
process.
look at the woods, right? When woods are properly kept, when forests are properly kept, and they naturally burn off the undergrowth, right?
Right.
Those plants thrive. Those
Right.
plants come to life, right? And so you'll see this, in our state and other states, they purposely will burn certain parts of undergrowth every so many years, right? To make sure we don't have bad wildfires when wildfires do come, but
Right.
to also charge that soil back, right? And help promote that growth, that healthy growth of the woods and stuff. I do want to pinpoint this though. You said they're a bigger root mass, deeper tap roots, right? I don't
Right.
know if you got to see how clear a good clear picture of it. There's Eric Hale right there, and we have a question too here in a second. But the root mass on that rutabaga was massive, right? I mean, and not only massive, but they went deep. They went so deep that I was digging on the outside of the raised bed and found pieces of root on the outside of the raised bed. All
That's
right,
yeah,
right, right.
yeah,
And then if you've seen that the amount of fine roots, right? Those very very fine roots that come off of the main tap roots, right? They were so much that it looked like horsehair, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's how much root mass was there. Completely different from last year when I
yeah.
grew rutabagas and had none of that, right? There was no deep tap roots. There was no, fine hairs all the way around it. And there certainly wasn't no 31 pounds, right? Like, I mean, 19 pounds is nothing to scoff at, but 31 pounds in a shorter amount of time, right? I mean, it just blew my mind. So we got a question real quick. I want
Sure.
to answer this real quick. I'll let you answer it. Let's see here. Well, show it. There we go. So Carol Prince wants to know if you can use it in all gardening or just certain things.
Yeah, yeah. So the reality is, I would tell people you can use it in all gardening. It really is not specific to a certain kind of plant or a certain kind of soil. And I think the reason is it's a fairly utilitarian kind of amendment to your soil. And what it's essentially doing is making what you have in that soil much more efficient and more effective to helping your plant. So, in fairness, if you have a really bad soil and there's very little organic content, it's going to
Right.
take more time. We got to be really clear. Like I love biochar. It is not a miracle amendment.
No.
It doesn't take you know junk soil and make it better immediately.
Right.
But what it does do is if you've got something in there, anything at all, some microbes, some organic content, it keeps it closer, and then over time it does
Right.
improve the wet. So I know it works really, really well. You're going to see fantastic results in a sandy soil because traditional sandy soil that water runs through it, the nutrients run through it. You don't keep the good stuff you need close to the root or the
Right.
plant very long. With biochar, it does get to set up shop and help that. So we know with sandy soil it works great. In clay soil, it does actually help with aeration. So
Yes,
you're
it
going to
does.
see, yeah.
Because
So
that's what I've got here.
to be honest, so I actually see it as that aeration. You can use it as part of a potting blend.
Yep.
When you're talking about potted plants and you're growing that way, absolutely. In my opinion, it does well with any kind of gardening and certain things. Now, recognize the pH of biochars is going to be around 9 or just over 9. It doesn't necessarily modify the soil pH much. There is a little bit of ash to it usually, but that's just something to be aware of if that's
Right.
something if you need to be concerned about that. But Carol, to answer your question, I'd say it's good for all things.
Yeah, and even though the pH is a little bit higher, when you blend it with your native soil or raised bed soil, you lower that pH.
Yeah,
I mean, it
absolutely.
does come down because my soil here, I need a dump truckload of this stuff, right? And here's why: because my soil is running at 5.2 to 5.5. So if I had a truckload of this dumped on there, I'd have probably about a 7.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
right,
which
for
is
sure.
what I was 6.8 to a 7, which would be perfect for me, right? But I mean, you're right. It does have that higher pH level, and that is good for people to know because you don't want to plant straight into it. You are going to want to blend it unless they get your all's compost because you do
Right.
have a compost blend, right?
Yeah. If I'll take a
Yeah,
second
go
on this.
ahead. Yeah,
There's the reason why we created a compost and biochar blend was really for me. I mean, because I needed something that was just a no brainer. Like I could just plant in it and go if I really wanted to, or I could blend it in with what I got in the ground or in a pot.
right,
But the reason is that the compost we use is made from wood. It's organic. It's got a high nutrient value, and what the biochar does just make sure we're going to create that healthy. I mentioned the ecosystem in that soil. So yeah, you can go straight into it without a problem. I like compost as our product that we introduced biochar with because we all we know what compost is. We've heard of that.
right,
Not a lot of people have heard about biochar.
Yep.
More and more have, right?
Right.
But we want you to understand it. So we package it together so you see the relationship.
Right.
Biochar makes your compost better,
Yep.
and that means you're making the soil better. And I think it's honestly it's working well in how we're communicating that. But but there are some people that have actually planted directly in biochar. You see it also even as just like a filter media and hydroponics and other things.
Right.
But it's not my recommendation. It's something that if I were to give you an application rate, and actually I don't know if we haven't talked about this, Ryan, but I would say 10% by volume of your soil is a good amount. It can be a
Right.
little higher if you're just using it on your lawn. In your lawn, it can be less. 5% is great.
Okay.
But that by volume, we've seen more and more as like a really appropriate amount of biochar in your soil by
Okay.
volume and down as deep as you want to go. But certainly where the roots will live, that's where you want that char.
I don't know if you got to see the video I'd done, but last week, whenever I got home with my rutabaga, I immediately transplanted it back where it was at in hopes that it would produce some seeds for me off of that rutabaga. Now, if it gets bigger, fine. I'm perfectly happy with that, but I just want to get some seeds off of it. So I replanted it because root crops will end up growing more. I mean, I've left them on my counter and they grow on the counter, So um, even cabbages will grow once you cut them off. They'll still grow. Just the head of cabbage will start to grow and make new shoots. So it's really crazy, but as long as they've got not out in the blistering sun, right, and
Right.
it's cool, and I get enough humidity, they'll draw that humidity out and grow, kind of like potatoes do when you
Yeah.
put them in a potato bin or something, right? The
Right.
grow spuds or whatever, same difference. Well, anyhow, I planted it back, but whenever I did, I dug all that raised bed out, and I took everything out. I poured new compost in the bottom, so I put new goat manure and rabbit manure down in the bottom because it's a cold fertilizer. You don't have to worry about burning. And then I took biochar, Wakefield biochar, dumped all over the top of it, mixed that in, and then all the stuff that was in the wheelbarrow, I took biochar and dumped it in there, mixed it all up,
Yep.
and then filled it back in, and then replanted my rutabaga. So that way, I've got biochar throughout the entire thing, and
Yep.
it should help it. And I recharged whatever might have been
Yep.
taken out or composted, because it does compost over time. Correct? The biochar,
The
does that break
biochar,
down?
well, so the carbon in that biochar, and it's just around 80% carbon.
Right.
It'll be around for hundreds of years. Like your
Okay.
great grandchildren will use the same biochar you put in that soil.
Okay.
That some of it, over time, hundreds of years, it'll decompose. It's because the carbon, and this is my brother telling me, the molecule is a circle. It's not going to break apart. It doesn't decompose for a very, very long time. So it actually does not go away. Now the other nutrients, the other organic content in that soil will probably compost or decompose faster because
Okay.
you've increased the microbial activity in that soil, and those
Okay.
microbes start to do their work, and that's what happens when your compost pile will actually finish faster if you have
That's good.
biochar in it. When you add, I would add 5, 10, 15% biochar just to your compost pile, even at any time, and it would help in the
Break it down.
in the rate of that composting. That's something to think about. But now the other part of this I kind of want to touch on, and I don't want to jump ahead on you, but the when you put raw biochar, brand new, and it hasn't been charged up, and you put it in the soil, there is a concern. What's it going to do to the water and nutrients to my seed? Is it going to take away from the seed? Is it going to take away from the plant root? And is it going to be a negative experience? And I will tell you that, what? In the first few days, it does kind of slow things down. I have seen this many times myself, especially with grass seed. The plant will start a little bit slower,
Right.
but then it just shoots right up.
Right.
And some of it is that biochar is stabilizing, it's absorbing, and then it's kind of everything's, you've kind of got a normalcy in that soil and everything's great. The other, I think, is that you're going to see the roots they're kind of working their way down first, and then it comes up. But it is something that you want to be aware of with biochar. You might see a slightly different behavior in how your plants grow.
Right.
Depending on whether or not the biochar had been charged up before you
Right.
put it in with your plant, or if you do it at the same time, right?
Right.
So that's a kind of an important note, is that, again, it's like biochar is not the miracle input, but man, it makes things better. You just kind of have to know what
Right.
in there.
Now, you mentioned charged. People might not know or understand that. I know what you're talking about.
Oh, sure.
Okay. But what are you talking about when you say charged? Here's the other thing they're going to want to know. Well, if I buy a bag of it, do I got to charge it? Okay.
Right.
So can you answer those two things for me?
Yeah. So charging is kind of the term we use when we're allowing the biochar to absorb the water, the nitrogen or fertilizers, the nutrients, and it's absorbing it. It's kind of like a sponge. If you have a dry sponge, that it'll take in that water to a point, and then it's fully wet, right? Saturated.
Yep.
Same concept with biochar. We call it charging it up, right? And it's not necessarily so dramatic that it just removes all of the moisture from the soil. It's not going to kill a plant, but it does actually have that behavior in the soil. Right. If it's not charged up before you put it in the soil. Now, here's an interesting note. Like, typically the concerns are when you have a very dry biochar. You'll know it if it's dry. It's dusty. It is all over. It is not easy to use when it's super dry. We actually have a fairly high moisture content in our biochar when it ships, in large part because of that. It's also because it's quenched with water in the making of it, and we just leave that water in there because it's got moisture as it's delivered to you. You have less of a concern in it creating a negative experience. But if you're, it's interesting. There are other biochar companies. We're happy they're out there because that means biochar is in demand, right? We're excited about the biochar industry. Different companies might do things differently, and I'd just like for people to know that if the char that you use is really dry, I do recommend that you let it sit in a bucket of water, for that matter. Before you put it in the soil. That's all you really need to worry about. Is it okay if I answer Carol's question about the planting trees? Absolutely. So when I've planted trees, I'll get that root ball, then you get your hole for that root ball, and I look at the volume of the entire hole you're putting that tree into, and I think I'm trying to do math. What's about 10% by volume, and I blend it into whatever soil I'm using to fill in the gap that's not where the root ball is, and that's the amount of bio. And what I love about biochar is that it really does help with tree health. It helps reduce the amount of disease in trees. We've actually seen with citrus trees, especially where we are in Georgia, Florida, there's something called greening disease. It's probably in a lot of the places. So it has actually completely eliminated greening disease in a lot of businesses that are growing these trees, beautiful trees.
That's great.
And honestly, there is a reason for that. It's a chemistry solution that I don't know how to describe correctly, but I will tell you there's research out there to show you. Actually, I think there might even be some links on our site. The char just creates the right chemistry. It creates the right behaviors in the soil for all the good bacteria and the good microbes that essentially kind of creates a block. It doesn't allow that disease to take hold of the root. There's more to it, but that's essentially the answer is yes. You should plant. I say you should plant your trees with biochar as part of the soil mix because it will help in that tree's health over time.
Or if you've already got trees established, just pour around the root base, right?
You can. I've taken a small auger as well and put some holes and then put it in there and just kind of with even I've charged up that char with something that might be good for the tree as well. And I've done that with some trees, and especially ones that you're trying to get to that need some help.
Right.
It's like giving it medicine.
Right.
Yeah. So that I've done it. You just need to put those holes around the drip line and where you need to, and it really helps the trees and shrubs benefit from biochar.
That's awesome. The
Yeah.
Eric, here's the guy that I was telling you about that had started mentioning biochar to me in 21. He likes using it, in his chicken bedding, so it soaks up
Yeah.
the nutrients from the manure, which
Yep.
is essentially what I was doing when I put the biochar in the bottom when I filled that goat, up with goat and rat manure and then mixed it together. I was trying to create that environment, right? Because we know there's microbes in that. We know it's breaking down. We know it's a cold fertilizer. You give it that little bit of help from that biochar, and you've to me in my mind it's been the perfect ingredients to grow in.
That's perfect. Absolutely. We actually have farms, poultry farms. I know there's one actually in Virginia. We just shipped half a trailer load of biochar to,
Oh wow.
and it's standard practice. And there's more to it than just charging up the char. It actually is better health for the chickens. It reduces moisture where there's less chance of problems with their feet. It helps with odor. It actually, when they peck at it, it gets in, gets through, it's in the litter already. So it's all ready to go. It just, there's a lot of benefits also with livestock. We've got some cattle farms cattle ranchers that are doing stuff with biochar. And, that's 100% a great thing to do, not for lots of reasons, but one of the great ones is you've got the most perfect charged up biochar you can get from that. And it really, it's so impactful to take that and put it in your soil. It really does work well. I think Eric's spot on with that.
It does. I that bed was made with hay. The one that the big rutabaga grew in there was hay, some grass. So you had your green and your brown. Your when you compost, you got to have your green, you got to have your brown. Right, your green is going to break down and cause the heat. The brown is going to I forget the terminology, but anyways, it all combines together and makes compost. Then you got the manure that was already breaking down. It's already went through their digestive tract and stuff, and it mixes up. So you've got this perfect blend, and then that biochar goes and it just goes and eats it, swells it up, holds on to it. So when the roots get back down there into it, it's just going to be this. And like you said, the microbial life. I'm really really been big on this for the past few years, where I use Azos, Mycos from Extreme Gardening, right?
Yep.
And there again, you can see the difference, right, with biochar versus non-biochar things. My carrots, no biochar in that. In with the ones in the trash. I grow giant carrots in a trash can. There was no biochar in there, right? I like a dummy. I didn't put any in there. I put them in my raised beds and in my pumpkins, right? And didn't put any in that trash can. And every one of them so far have went down this season.
Huh.
Well,
there may be reasons for that, but certainly it could have helped, right? And it's all about, again, it's kind of like let nature do its thing. Nature knows what to do. We've lost a lot of that organic content and carbon in our soil just over time, different reasons. And adding biochar is the way to more rapidly sequester, get that carbon back in the soil. I think that there's an analogy that's been used frequently in the biochar world that you may have heard about, how it's very similar to a coral reef in the ocean.
Right.
Without a coral reef, we talk about that, the coral reefs are dying. Well, why is that a problem? It's because it all of a sudden you don't have, like, the little organisms don't have a place to live, so the big organisms can't thrive, and all of a sudden the whole chain of things is broken because there's no place for that natural environment to survive.
Right.
You need a home, and so the biochar is naturally
the reef.
Right. Yeah, it's the coral reef in your soil. It is creating the home for all those little microbes and good things to happen, where you're holding the nitrogen, you're holding these nutrients, you're allowing the little workers in there to get that stuff transferred into the root, and it's more efficient. You mentioned, I'll go back to when you mentioned the wildfires and how, or even when you just burn a field just to start over.
Right.
I do it I have some acreage and I do the same thing. I'll burn the field just to kind of start over. what's interesting is like that's a very inefficient way to get carbon to the soil. When you're done burning that, most of that fuel goes up in smoke,
Right.
right? There might be a few percent that's carbon that stays on top of the soil. It doesn't even get in the soil.
Right.
So what if, and this is the biochar, like what if that was 80% carbon and you put it in the soil instead of just a few percent laying on top? Right. And that's what biochar is. It's that massively efficient construction of this soil, coral reef, right?
Right.
So that's what's really going on is we're creating a place for nature to really do its thing, and it's just so efficient. Like you have a lot more nutrient in your soil than you probably think you do. It's just not able to get to the plant.
Right. Or it's locked out.
It's locked out. Right.
Right. Which biochar helps to make sure that they're not locked out.
Exactly. Right. There's some other fun things about biochar that we don't think about sometimes. It's occasionally there's stuff in your soil you don't want. It's a contaminant.
Right.
Some sort of it could be there were rubber tires or something in the soil before it was cleared out and your home was built, or your farm had other contaminants and things, especially in urban areas. Who knows what kind of stuff could be in the soil. What's interesting about biochar is that same chemistry that holds the lighter molecules and the nutrients and lets it out, that same charge of the char will actually hold the heavier molecules, those contaminants, the heavy metals.
Right.
It holds it. It doesn't let it out. It keeps it in the char. So it actually
filters it.
Yeah, it filters it. And then the bacteria stuff will eventually eat on that and convert it to something that's good. But it will remediation. It'll filter out the bad stuff too.
Right.
And so we've seen tremendous benefit, especially in areas where let's say your home, you have these walkways and driveways, and you use salt to get rid of ice during the wintertime.
Right.
Or any kind of de-icing kind of fluid or whatever it is. Not very good for your grass. Not very good for the flower beds. And you may see even brown lines along that walkway or driveway early on in the spring. Well, the char actually does hold that chemical and keeps it from damaging the plant. And we see it also, your dog might create burn marks, right?
Right.
Same, we actually see biochar helping remove those brown marks. If you get it in the soil, it'll help manage that so it doesn't damage the grass as much.
That's awesome.
So that's an interesting bonus, I think, with biochar. And here's the great thing about with Wakefield Biochar. So I mentioned my twin brother. And his PhD was in biochar. Well, he went to the University of Missouri where there's a nuclear reactor. It's a research reactor. Right. He was studying biochar absorbing radioactive isotopes. Like it was absorbing radiation.
That's crazy.
That's what we're talking about, is that it will hold these really terrible things and not allow it to destroy your plant.
I know people are going to be like, what? Yeah. And I know that is true because it's not biochar, but it is a char-like substance like biochar, which I would say it's probably the same thing, maybe just finer, like crushed into a powder almost, right? That people will ingest in their meals, right? To help flush their body of chemicals and all that stuff, right? And they'll do it, some of them do it quite often. Most of them do it like once a week or something. And they also use like diatomaceous earth or something like that, right?
Right.
And it just flushes all the stuff out of your body. I'm too scared to do that, but I mean, there is proof of that, that it helps to keep out the bad or to absolutely just flush your system of the bad stuff, right? So
the same way it's a sponge for the good stuff. It's a sponge and hold on to bad stuff, but it keeps the bad stuff and doesn't let it back out.
Right.
Now I'm definitely not going to recommend anybody.
No.
For what it's worth, I have, because I had a really intelligent lawn and garden store owner who I wanted him to put my product in his store, and he said, "Hey, I know about biochar, and if it's good biochar, then you're going to take some and you're going to eat it right here in front of me." And I said, "Okay," and I ate it just fine. It's crunchy.
Right.
That wasn't real excited about, but it's actually yeah, there's some real
Eric Hill says it's activated charcoal is what I'm talking about.
yeah, yeah. We actually will call that's. I think you're right, Eric, on that. It's an activated carbon. It's a higher, usually made at a much higher temperature than the pyrolysis temperature for biochar. Um, at Wakefield, we like to call biochar a poor man's activated charcoal, and it's because of the methodology of production. It's perfect for soil, but there are filter carbons that are made at a much higher temperature at a much tighter spec for a very specific purpose like filtration. And that's right. So it's actually typically it's a carbon that's much more expensive, frankly.
Right.
But this is biochar is in that same family of carbon. Absolutely.
So I mean, that's funny though that he wanted you to eat it though. To before he let you sell in the store. That's pretty funny.
He brought some in. I was very happy. It was worth it. I'd do it every day if I had to. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
But
Uh-oh. Well, maybe it's me, or maybe
I like. Oh no, there we go. All right, we're back. So, like I was saying, I like biochar. Not only do I like the biochar, I like the company, family owned. You great to deal with and stuff. Just whatever I've needed, you have been there. And that is important to a consumer. That is important to growers. That you guys will have that relationship with with people. If they got a question, they can ask it. If they need it, you guys have got it. You guys have got whatever. You've got the soil conditioner. You've got the compost. What other products are you guys thinking about coming up with? You got any other products?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I actually really appreciate you asking that question. We do. We wanted to start with something. We wanted to be simple.
Right.
End of the day, we are, Missouri, simple. Let's just kind of keep it simple. We're going to talk to you in an honest way. We're not going to, I'll tell you when it's not going to work. I'll tell you when it's going to work. Right. I had to see it work for myself before I felt like I needed to share the story. But I started the company that way, where let's just keep it simple. So we have biochar, we have the compost biochar. But what we're seeing is as more and more people understand what biochar can do and what it needs, like, for example, a charged up biochar, something that has inoculated, not necessarily with the compost, but some other microbial solution. Yeah, like doing something where it's a ready to go biochar, charged up. We certainly can start to cater the char to different kinds of crops or plants using a specific type of inoculant. And so we will be spinning into iterations of our biochar that is more specific to a use.
Yeah.
But what we didn't want was to introduce this product to somebody and not knowing how they would use it, give them a bad experience. So we kept it very simple to start.
Right.
But we've already got testing going on. Actually, Colorado State is testing some biochar right now, some of our biochar in different ways with an inoculant that's charged into the char, so that you don't have to do anything except just put it in the soil. It's ready to go without compost or any of that. And we are developing new product. It's interesting. So we talk about our biochar, and there's actually 3 different ways. And I don't want to spend too far away from soil conditioning, but we talk about better soil, which is our conversation today.
Right.
Better world is where we can talk about how biochar and the way it's made reduces greenhouse gases. You're taking waste biomass that would decompose and create CO2, converting it to a fixed carbon. We are reducing, in our case, about 2 tons of CO2 for every ton of biochar that's used. So it's kind of 2-1.
Right.
Better soil, better world. And then we talk about what we call above the soil. And that means all the things that you can do with biochar that aren't necessarily putting it in the ground. And it can be things like, well, feeding it to livestock or chickens to help them with their health.
Right.
It's a filter. There are a lot of things that we're doing with biochar that are above the soil.
Right.
And that has been really interesting to watch happen because at the end of the day, it's a sustainably manufactured carbon.
Yeah.
And there is so much in this world where the carbon that's used for filters for manufacturing is a carbon that's from petroleum based, materials.
Right.
And we all know, I mean, there is a case that we need to change how we're manufacturing things. And Wakefield's right there in it. We're doing a lot of research. We're helping a lot of companies with their research as well, finding different ways to use biochar. So yeah, the answer to your question, we have a lot of new products for the soil.
That's awesome.
But we're doing some other things as well. I actually have, come to think of it, I've got a planter box that I've created, and it's from recycled ocean plastic. And
that's cool.
So, yeah, it's really a neat planter box, and it's actually something that's hopefully will be in the stores, I would say, by the middle of next year.
Okay.
But we found a group that recycles ocean plastic. They get it all out of the ocean, and so we're making some boxes from that, and that'll be out there as well. Because we love to be a part of like your world, your lifestyle, and we know that Wakefield as a brand we sell biochar, but we're starting to recognize other problems, other things that we can do to help, and
right.
we're evolving into that as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome because there is so many different things that we can do to just pick up and you recycle, right? I mean, I can remember my great grandparents, they kept egg cartons, they kept milk jugs, they kept, plastic bowl containers, right? You didn't know if you were getting butter or green beans when you went in the refrigerator, right? There's so much of that, but we live in a society today that is a throwaway society. Let's just throw it in the trash. Trash man comes, picks it up. We never see it again, but it goes somewhere, right? Yeah. And we do need to think about where it's going, what it's going to be turned into, what, the uses that we could have used it for. Right. And that's great. I mean, that's great because our oceans are polluted and we do need to clean them up. And you guys using that, to make planter boxes out of is awesome. Turning biochar into different things. What are some of the uses? Because now I'm interested. What are some of the uses that you guys are finding outside of soil for biochar besides feeding livestock?
So some of the things are related to concrete.
Okay.
You can replace some of the sand in concrete with biochar, and what you have is it's slightly structurally the same. It's actually a little bit lighter.
Okay.
But it is reducing. There's just a lot, like as far as being a carbon positive manufacturing material. Concrete's pretty bad.
Right.
So concrete's one. There are plastics. When reducing the amount of carbon black from petroleum-based carbon in plastics is another thing. This is not something Wakefield's in, but I see it so much, is in like toothpaste and soaps and other things where you're starting to see activated carbon in different consumer goods.
Right.
There's just a lot of things. Actually, there was a report recently from MIT. Researchers are taking, essentially it's activated carbon, but could be biochar to generate power or create essentially a battery in a concrete block because of the way they've configured the carbon structure inside of that, so that you just unique ways of storing energy.
That's cool.
Hey, for me, I don't know how they do that.
Right.
I mean, that's just stuff that's going on. But so there really are some other ways. There is a carpet manufacturer in Georgia that we work with that has the backing of their carpet is a fairly decent percent of it is made from biochar. So that's one thing that we are actually providing to a manufacturer that's not related to the soil.
Right.
So what they found was the carpet doesn't smell the same. It has less odor. It's
Ah,
lighter, and it actually, so it's also a carbon negative product. So it's very
it would
green.
probably be good too if you got pets,
Oh
because it
yeah,
would probably filter the pet smell out, like dogs running through the house with dirty paws, or,
yeah.
whatever, right?
I think you're onto something. Yeah.
Right, right. I mean, because
Uh,
it would have to it would have to filter that smell out.
Absolutely.
Really
Um,
cool. Got
I see.
a question here from Robert. He said, can biochar be used on indoor grows, flowers, cannabis, etc.?
Oh, 100%.
Yep.
100%. I mean, I personally work with some cannabis growers here where I am, and they absolutely love and appreciate the benefits of biochar in their grow and what
Yep.
they're doing. So that is 100% a good idea. There actually are, I feel, certain plants that react more positively to biochar, and cannabis is one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Cannabis is a very difficult plant to kind of get used to. I think from what I've been told, it's very finicky. In a lot of situations, right?
Well,
And indoor, I guess, is even more so from what I've been told than it is outdoor.
Well, I know that there is a real science to it. That if you're growing, you have a certain spec. There is a way you want that plant to be managed, and so obviously any input you have to be careful with. But I'm going to tell you that it does benefit cannabis
Right.
for sure, 100%.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Um, so I got one last question before we can maybe open it up to some of these guys if they got any. Um, what what is your primary source for the making of your biochar? Is it leaves, woods? What type of wood? What all are you using?
So Wakefield, when we started the company, we actually started to see this happening. My brother and I said, well, if we're going to do this, let's create a business model where it can scale. It can be
Right.
make a big difference. And so, in analyzing the types of feedstock, wood and wood waste was the one that across the country was most readily available, and it was most similar in its quality and characteristics. And with that, we say, okay, wood waste, and we actually work with what's called pre-consumer wood waste. So it's not pallet wood or wood scrap from, like, your tree trimmings and all of that. It's actually, we work with big paper manufacturers and get their wood waste just as it goes through their mill before it's even treated with anything. It's
Okay.
completely untreated wood, and that was just something where we know there are literally hundreds of thousands of tons every year made of wood waste. And it's this usually a softwood. They're hardwood as well, but a lot of softwood. So that's what we use, because
Okay.
that was the feedstock that we could essentially make a big business from.
Right.
Now, any biomass can be made into biochar, and there are lots of good other things that you can use for biochar manufacturing, especially if you want to make it at home. But I mean, whether it could be pecan shells and peanut shells, it can be any kind of wood waste, it could be agricultural waste. Farmers and all there's lots of corn stover is one. The issue is you got to think about, well, what did you put in that field to grow the corn? Is that going
Right.
to be in that stover? Are what kind of things are you putting in? And you got to make sure that the biochar you create doesn't carry with it anything bad.
Right.
So that we look for a clean biomass waste material, and that happens to be, in this case, loblolly pine trees from Georgia and Florida.
I do got a question. So, because I know somebody will end up asking this, whether it's tonight or it's a
Yeah,
month from now when they're watching this. Biochar takes bad things and locks it up in there.
yeah.
So if you make biochar made that had been sprayed with something, right? Is it not just going to lock it up in there and not come back out into your soil?
That's no, it's wonderful. So let's say those trees were sprayed with something. Who knows
Right.
what? Right? Uh, there's something in the soil where they grew, and the roots brought some sort of contaminant into the wood as well.
Right.
So that's a critical question, and so we actually have to be aware of that. But if the biochar is made correctly, and we're at 550, 650 degrees Celsius, and the particle size is
What
fairly.
is that in Fahrenheit?
That's a great question. A lot more. It's hot. It's hot. It's
Okay.
really hot.
Is it
Yeah.
like 1300 or something like it? Maybe here.
That,
Go ahead. I'll look it up.
Somebody figure that out. That's right.
Yeah.
Somebody figure that out. Then at that temperature, really all of that is destroyed. All those contaminants are obliterated.
Okay.
We send our stuff to labs very often, looking for heavy metals or contaminants or things that might be bad for your soil. And it's critical that any biochar company selling biochar is evaluating their product frequently, because you're dealing with an organic substance. So, just by default, there could be variations, and that variation has to be tracked. So that's where we had to source. We said we got to source material where actually the place where we're getting our feedstock of wood has their own criteria, making sure their stuff is clean and ready for manufacturing. They already pass a bunch of tests just before the timber even gets to us. Right. And then we use it. So that's a critical question. I know there's a lot of people that like to make biochar. We love that. Not only do you check what's that feedstock made of, is there something in it you don't like? But then also, how are you making it? The pyrolysis process you put it through, you make sure none of those volatile gases condense back. Okay. You can also create a problem. If you smell your biochar, if there is an odor of any kind in your biochar when you're done, it's not done correctly. There should be no
smell,
no campfire smell.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
That's my opinion, and that's what we kind of that's our sniff test, right?
Right.
We got to make sure it's good. That there's none of those gases have condensed back on the carbon or on the char if there's no odor, right?
Okay.
You'll smell it.
Okay.
But to answer your question, really all these heavy metals are in that pyrolysis process where it goes to really hot.
Right.
In a chamber with almost no oxygen. It just cooks. That all gets destroyed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So even if it was sprayed, it wouldn't matter.
It really, you don't necessarily want to go look for that kind of material, but there's a very good probability it'll get destroyed. I wouldn't chance it. Right. Because unless you've got really expensive pyrolysis equipment that you can control to a high degree of certainty, there is a chance some of it will be uncooked. We call that salt and pepper biochar, where there's a little bit of salt in the pepper.
Right.
You see a little bit of that raw wood. Well, what's in that?
Right. Yep.
Did it cook all the way through, or did you let the gases condense back down on it?
Right.
So you want to be careful, and I would recommend, just use the sniff test to make sure. That's one indication that's good biochar.
Okay. Now the temperature at 600 Celsius is 1112.
Okay.
So it's 1,112 degrees. That is very, very hot.
That's hot.
So yeah.
It's a small particle, so at that temperature, it cooks through really fast. We do a fast pyrolysis. It doesn't stay in the chamber very long, but because of the way the feedstock is managed, it cooks through. It's clean, and
can you kind of tell us about that process? Like, you get these scrap wood in, right? Do you guys like process that? Do you crumble it up smaller before you put it into the chamber? How long does it take to kind of take us through that process if you don't care?
Yeah. So the when you want to create biochar through pyrolysis, and you're dealing with equipment that handles it, let's say a continuous flow, it's going through a system, right? You want everything to be essentially the same particle size and at the same moisture level going in, so you know what's coming out. So what happens is the wood is allowed to dry to a certain moisture level.
Okay.
So it's consistent. It goes through the chamber at a similar, the temperature is around 550, it depends on what's going on with the moisture, but it's in that 550 to 650 Celsius range.
Okay.
And it does need to be a consistent particle size. Now, we are lucky. We're using a waste wood from a very large manufacturer that has already done the work for us. It's already coming in at basically 1 to 3 millimeter particle size, like
It's
what you
almost like
see.
sawdust.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just what it is to naturally. That's
Right.
just so that happens in our favor. But if you're making it in a different setting or a different feedstock,
Like
um,
from wood chips or something.
well, yeah, it just in anyone with pecan shells, and we work with actually hemp. There's a lot of ways you can get biomass. The key to a really good biochar manufacturing is that what's going in is consistent, and so you know that what's coming out is consistent,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So there's a lot of prep with moisture level and particle size. We don't look for. It's not our situation because it's all the same stuff. But you wouldn't want to put a bunch of softwood and then a bunch of um, uh, pallet wood that's been chopped up, and then just kind of running different stuff through
Right.
because you don't know like you got to tweak the system so it's always going to cook correctly, and you can't just it's not that agile, right?
Right.
You kind of like baking bread. You want it at the same temperature the whole time.
I got you. Awesome. Awesome. So I'm gonna open it up to anybody who has any questions for you. That way they can ask and fire away. So if you guys are in the chat, you got any questions, feel free to comment them, and we'll answer some questions. Um, but while we're waiting on questions to come in, let's see. Well, we got one here.
Yep.
He said he thought farmers could turn corn stalks into biochar, then put them back into the field after being composted in animal manure. That
Yeah.
way, the carbon from the stalks stay in the soil. Yeah, I mean, I would assume they can do that, right?
They can. Here's the issue. We talk to farmers a lot. We love the idea of like if you think about the impact we can make on our environment, getting large ag farmers, the acreage. It's amazing. That is the ultimate goal. Here's the feedback we get, especially the bigger the farm. It's just giving them another job. It's so much
Right.
more work. I mean, it
Right.
really is a process, and because that the corn stalks, for example, got to be ground down. It's got to be allowed to a certain moisture level. Then you got to run the pyrolysis system, and when you start it, you don't want to stop it because you got to
Right.
keep that consistent. And so that could be a 24/7 consideration. So the feedback is from the farmer, like, don't give me work to do. And then you got to talk about, well, how do you apply it and all that. So one of the things we're looking at is creating sort of these satellite biochar manufacturing or decentralized biochar manufacturing locations. And ultimately, we can do that for the farmer. And whether it goes back to that farm or not, that is a discussion related to finance. What's the cost of that?
Right.
There is concern because all farms will use fertilizers and herbicides and other things. Not all, but that is common.
Right.
And again, we're talking about what's the condition of the feedstock going in. So if there's an herbicide used somewhere, is it safe? Did the
Right.
biochar come out okay? I had a great story from actually it was a cannabis grower. Come to think of it, he got some manure-based compost, and he'd been using
Yep.
it for years. Well, some field near that where those cows were, they sprayed a special herbicide. Didn't
Yep.
even know.
Aminopyralid.
Yeah, and so everything he was growing in that compost died.
Yep.
And then the great story was he put biochar in the compost, and the plants came back. So
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
I'll
awesome.
have some photos up soon on our social media about that. But it was so that the issue of farmers is a big deal. I think that is the holy grail of biochar. We want farmers to use biochar. We got to figure out the best way to do it so that they benefit not only from the crop but also they can understand the benefit financially. And it's a big discussion.
It is. It's a huge discussion, and I can vouch for aminopyralids being horrible because I have animals here that I have to feed hay to. There are broadleaf plants that birds poop everywhere.
Right.
Once you can't stop a
Yep.
bird from flying over and pooping, right? And they are God's wondrous seed planters, right? They just plant everywhere. Okay, but in a hay field, you get some of these different coarse stalked, broad leafed plants started. And it's not just go up there and pull it out and you're done. You know, you might not see that one. And then the following season, it went to seed. Now you have, amassed this little partial, right? Might be, the size of a basketball court or something. But, then you find it and you're like, oh crap, what do you do, right? Well, by the time you usually have found it, it done went to seed again. Now you have this whole big area. The reason why I know this is there's a great big hay field behind me. I cut the hay field with those guys, and they have got this stuff that was along the edge of the field. Now it's in the center of the field, okay? And they've got this wide swath of this stuff that early spring, it doesn't affect first harvest. Late spring, you get to the second harvest, and you've got pretty much nothing but that stuff, right? Which is not edible for the animals that, the horse people are not going to buy that kind of hay. I'll buy it because I feed it to goats and pigs, so it's not a big deal to me. They'll eat it, right? But a lot, when you're trying to get premium dollar hay, you can't charge a premium when it's got that stuff in it. So the problem with that is farmers will use aminopyralid to spray and kill the broadleaf out. Great idea. You're trying to make sure you get premium and nothing but hay and premium top dollar for your hay. The problem comes in, though, when you compost that horse manure, compost that cow manure, whatever it was fed to, the aminopyralid runs through their body out into the manure. Then you compost it, put it into your fields, and now you have just spent all that money on compost that's contaminated with aminopyralids that's going to kill every broadleaf that you plant in it.
Right.
And so the conversation is, what do we do, right? What do we need the hay? We can't stop the birds from pooping, right? No. We can't afford to cover a hay field, right? To make sure that nothing gets in there. So the conversation is, well, how do we stop this? We can't go out there and pick these by hand, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to see them until it's too late. It starts with one and then it just, and so that's great though, that if somebody has a problem, because I had that problem with aminopyralid where I used a big box store brand of compost. I had been using it, no issues at all. I started using it again and it started killing plants. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong with this? Right. So now if I use big box store stuff, which I try not to, but if I do have to, I generally try to plant something in it to test it out. Every bag.
Oh, wow.
That's a problem.
Yes.
Plant something in every bag just to see if it's contaminated or not, right? But it's good to know that biochar can be mixed in there, because what I had been told, you have to dig it all out, throw that all away, and start over. But it's good to know that you can put biochar in there and you can essentially filter it out.
Right. That's right. I think that's right. And all this is around knowing what you're putting in your soil. Right. And
absolutely.
That's a huge concern, and we're all, I think what's happening, there's this mindset is shifting. We're all really at every level talking about, well, what are we putting in the soil? Right. And that's that's where, we think biochar is an important part of that conversation.
Right. We're all trying to be more conscious of what we're putting in the soil, because whatever goes in that soil essentially is going to go in us.
That's right. Right.
And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm tired of hearing the C word everywhere. Because cancer. It's all you hear, and a lot of it has to do with what we put in our body. And so that consciousness, that awareness of what we're putting in the soil transfers to what's going in our body is a very important conversation for everyone to have.
Well, this is great. And I just want to take a moment. Thank you very much for letting me talk about biochar. And hopefully those that are listening maybe have learned something they didn't know about biochar through this conversation. In that there is a way naturally to improve your soil, make it healthier for the plant, for you. It is not a miracle product, but it is a way to really improve what you're doing, make your work more effective and more important by just
Right.
taking advantage of everything you've already done with that soil. It's going to stay there. It's going to be more impactful to the health of the plant.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Absolutely.
I mean, this has been a lot of fun.
It has been a lot of fun. So I guess if there's nobody else needing any questions answered, I'm going to go through this real quick. Then me and Tony will end this. So August 22nd, we've got Ange Ferrero Fanning Homestead coming on. So next Tuesday, we got her coming on. She's a great grower, a great gardener, big Instagram channel there. August 29th, we have Jesus Loving Homestead, be Nathan and Carmen. They'll be on with us the 29th. September 5th is Nicole Smith Gardening. September 12th is Chase from Trophy Smack. They're the ones that sponsored the championship belt that I'm not going to win this year for pumpkin growing. um, then September 19th, we got Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. September 26th, we have Randall and Travis Ginger from Extreme Gardening. And Travis is the guy that has the 2,560-pound North American record for the giant pumpkin. We'll be talking about our end of the season, what all's going on. It won't be the end, but it'll be close enough to the end. Only like 2 weeks left after that point. October 3rd, we have Yogi Hollow Farm. Lisa will be on with us October 3rd. October 11th, which is a Tuesday, or no, Wednesday. Not a Tuesday, it's Wednesday. I had to bump it up because I'll be traveling that Tuesday. We have Tony from Kettle Kitchen coming on with us. October 17th, we have who was supposed to be here last week. I can't think of the name. Let me see. Acorn Creek Farmstead will be here with us October 17th. And then I think I'm going to have October 24th. Hopefully, I'll have Seven Ken with us. We'll see about that. I got to talk to them and get this lined out with them. So, guys, that's the lineup for the upcoming days. October 31st. All the way through November 28th is open. Enoch Graham will be with us, the Urban Gardener, on December 5th. And then December 12th, 19th, and 26th are open. If you want to get in here, let me know. Email me, babydrill2119yahoo.com. We'll get you listed and put on here and scheduled and get you on because we love talking to all sorts of different people, growers, gardeners, homesteaders. It's all fun. So hit me up if you want to join us. But that's going to be all for us tonight. Tony, I'll wrap this up with you when we end this. But guys, as always, we appreciate you watching, and we'll see you tomorrow right here from the Hollers and Hills of West Virginia. See y'all.
Thank you very much.